It was just another ordinary night at home. I was sitting alone in the living room, watching TV, with all the lights off, letting the glow of the screen be the only source of light in the room. The stillness of the night was almost peaceful, but my insomnia kept me restless. It was already past 1:30 in the morning, and I was starting to feel a gnawing hunger in my stomach. I decided to go to the kitchen to grab something to eat. I opened the fridge and found a piece of chocolate cake left over from earlier. It seemed like the perfect snack to quiet the emptiness I felt inside. After grabbing a plate and sitting down at the kitchen table, I began to eat. The silence was almost too much, like the house itself was holding its breath. But then, as I chewed, I started to notice something odd. There was a strange feeling in the air, like the atmosphere had shifted somehow. I couldn't quite place it, but a growing unease crept over me. It was as if I wasn't truly alone anymore, despite the stillness of the house. Just as I took another bite, I heard something faint but distinct. The sound came from the kitchen door. I stopped mid-chew and turned my head. I couldn't see anything, but I clearly heard the doorknob start to twist back and forth, like someone on the other side was trying to get in. The door was made of glass, so I could only make out vague shadows through the darkness outside, but there was no one there. My heart skipped a beat, and my mind raced. Something was definitely wrong. As I continued eating the cake, trying to shake off the weird feeling in the air, a noise broke the silence. It was subtle at first, but then it grew louder and harsh, erratic rattling coming from the kitchen door. I froze mid-bite, my heart racing as I looked toward the source of the noise. The doorknob was turning violently, twisting back and forth as though someone was desperately trying to get in. I couldn't see anything on the other side of the door, not a shadow or a silhouette. The darkness outside was thick, so thick that I couldn't make out any details, but I could hear it, whoever or whatever was on the other side of that door, trying to force their way in. The rattling continued, sending chills down my spine. My breath caught in my throat, and a cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. The fear that I had been trying to suppress suddenly consumed me. I didn't know what to do. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body was frozen, unable to react. Panic took over, and I instinctively scrambled under the kitchen table, hiding in the shadows. My pulse thundered in my ears as I held my breath, praying that whatever it was wouldn't find me. The doorknob twisted again, this time with more force, and I felt my body tense, every muscle on high alert. I could hear nothing now except for the maddening sound of that twisting handle. My hands shook violently as I crouched under the table, terrified of what would happen next. In the midst of the overwhelming panic, I couldn't hold it in anymore. My voice trembled as I screamed, "Dad." The word barely escaped my lips, but somehow it was loud enough to be heard. I heard his footsteps immediately, the sound of him rushing down the stairs in a hurry. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat louder than the last, as the rattling of the doorknob continued relentlessly, filling the silence with its eerie rhythm. I could barely breathe as I huddled under the table, my body frozen in terror. The door felt like it was getting closer, the rattle now almost a deafening sound. I tried to stay silent, to stay hidden, but every part of me was screaming, begging for help. My father's footsteps grew louder, his presence like a faint beacon of hope, but the fear was too much, too overpowering. As my father reached the kitchen, I could hear him grab the baseball bat we kept by the door for protection. I could hear the determination in his movements, the way he prepared himself for whatever was behind that door. I could imagine his face, filled with concern and fear, but also a fierce resolve to protect me. I knew he was ready to face whatever was out there, but my body was still paralyzed, unable to move or help him in any way. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice stern and commanding as he moved toward the door. The doorknob stopped turning. The silence that followed felt suffocating, and for a moment I wondered if whatever was out there had heard my father's command. Would it run away, or was it just waiting for us to make the next move? My father reached the door and shouted, demanding to know who was on the other side. The moment his voice cut through the silence, the rattling of the doorknob abruptly stopped. My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment there was nothing but the sound of our breathing in the tense quiet. Then, in one swift motion, my father yanked the door open and flicked on the outside light, his eyes scanning the area, searching for anything that could explain what had just happened. To his shock, there was nothing, no one. The yard was empty, bathed in the harsh glow of the porch light, revealing nothing but shadows. My father stepped outside, looking around frantically, his eyes darting from one corner to the other. But no matter how hard he searched, there was no sign of anyone, not a soul in sight. Considering how violently the doorknob had been turning, there was no way anyone could have run off that quickly without being seen. The eerie silence that followed was almost suffocating. My father stood there for a few seconds, still gripping the baseball bat, trying to make sense of it all. I stayed hidden under the table, my mind racing, struggling to piece together what had just occurred. There was no logical explanation. Whoever or whatever had been at that door was now gone, leaving only a lingering sense of dread in its wake. The air in the kitchen felt thick with uncertainty, and a chilling realization settled in. Whatever had been there, whatever had caused that doorknob to turn like a madman's game, was not something that could be easily explained. The fear of the unknown crept back into my bones, more intense than ever. Something was out there, and it had somehow vanished without a trace. Shaking with fear, I tried to make sense of everything that had just happened. My father and I checked the area around the house, looking for any sign of what or who might have been there. We inspected the yard, the surrounding bushes, and even the street, but there was nothing, no footprints, no trace of any person, animal, or anything that could explain what had caused that doorknob to spin uncontrollably. It was as if the whole thing had been a nightmare, something that couldn't possibly have happened in the real world. But despite the lack of evidence, the feeling of unease lingered. It was as if the air itself was still heavy with the presence of something unnatural, something that had been there, only to disappear without a trace. I couldn't shake the thought that whatever had caused that doorknob to turn like it did wasn't just a random occurrence. There was something more sinister at play, something beyond our understanding, and that thought filled me with dread. The event left a permanent mark on my mind, a dark shadow that I couldn't escape. The image of that rattling doorknob and the terror that washed over me stayed with me for days. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Even though my father had tried to brush it off as some kind of prank or misunderstanding, I knew deep down that what we had experienced was not something that could be easily explained away. The mystery of the turning doorknob and the sudden, unexplained presence outside our kitchen door would never be solved. It haunted us, a reminder of how fragile our sense of security really is. And every time the house grew quiet at night, I couldn't help but wonder, what was it that came to our door that night, and what did it want? I come from a family where the supernatural isn't just a topic of conversation, it's a reality. Many of my relatives have had their share of strange experiences. Some are sensitive to spirits, and one of my uncles is even a medium. But I've always kept my distance from that side of things. I wanted a normal, simple life, one free of shadows and whispers from the beyond. I never sought any connection to the paranormal, yet peace is something I've never really known. Since I was young, there were voices, faint whispers that would come out of nowhere, interrupting my sleep and sometimes my everyday life. I'd feel a cold murmur close to my ear, like something was trying to get my attention, but when I'd look around, no one was ever there. And then there were the headaches, constant and relentless, like a heavy weight pressing down on the back of my neck. Despite my reluctance, a part of me suspected that these experiences weren't random. I believed they came from something beyond, something I wanted no part of. But no matter how hard I tried to shut it out, to pretend it wasn't real, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was somehow trapped. It was as if this dark, unseen presence followed me, haunting the edges of my life, refusing to let go. I had no choice but to carry on, trying to ignore what felt like an invisible shadow clinging to me. One night, I had a dream so vivid and disturbing that it felt more like an intrusion than a dream. In it, I found myself on the scene of a horrible car accident, twisted metal, broken glass, people lying injured across the road. There were victims everywhere, their faces twisted in pain and shock. But what struck me the most, what left me with a bone-deep chill, was that spirits were there too, hovering over the wounded, tending to them in a way I couldn't fully understand. They moved with a strange purpose, as if they knew what they were doing, as if they'd done it 1,000 times before. I woke up with a start, my heart pounding in my chest. The dream felt too real, too clear, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just some figment of my imagination. Something about it seemed purposeful, almost like a warning. I sat up in bed, frozen with a sense of dread, wondering what I was supposed to do with what I'd seen. But there were no answers, no clear message, only an eerie unease that seemed to linger long after the dream faded. As the morning crept in, I tried to brush it off, to convince myself that it was just a nightmare, nothing more. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something else, something darker, as though the dream was a glimpse of something beyond my control. There was a heaviness in my chest, a sense that something was about to happen, and that somehow I was connected to it. Trying to shake the feeling, I forced myself to go about my routine, telling myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But even as I tried to push the thoughts aside, the unease lingered like a shadow I couldn't escape. The next morning, I tried to shake off the lingering dread as I went into the kitchen to make some coffee. As I sat down with my mug, my dog walked over and sat right in front of me. At first, I didn't think much of it until I noticed the way he was staring at me. His gaze was intense and wavering, like he was looking through me or at something just behind me. It was so unusual that I felt a chill run down my spine. For a moment, we just stared at each other. His eyes were wide and focused, almost as if he were trying to tell me something or warning me of something I couldn't see. The silence in the room felt heavy, and a strange sense of alertness took over me. My mind flashed back to the dream those spirits hover over the injured people, and the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. A thought crept into my mind, uninvited. Did someone die? It felt absurd, but the feeling was so strong that I couldn't ignore it. My dog was still staring and blinking, and it made me feel as if he somehow knew more than I did. I wanted to shake it off as just my imagination, but his behavior was too eerie, too purposeful to ignore. I reached down to pet him, hoping to break the tension, but he didn't respond like he usually would. Instead, he just kept his eyes fixed on me, silent and still. That's when I realized that whatever I had dreamed of the night before might not have been just a dream. Hoping to clear my mind, I decided to go for a run on the trail near my house. The fresh air and exercise usually helped me shake off any lingering tension, but as I approached the trail, I noticed a section cordoned off with caution tape, police lights flashing nearby. A crowd had gathered, murmuring in hushed voices, and I felt an inexplicable dread creep over me. Drawing closer, I saw the wreckage of a car, crumpled and mangled, that had clearly rolled over multiple times, coming to rest against a cluster of trees. The vehicle was in pieces, barely recognizable, its frame twisted and broken. But then I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. Despite the catastrophic state of the car, the driver's cabin was almost untouched. Somehow, the space around the driver was completely intact, as though protected by an invisible force. The onlookers whispered in shock, and someone said that the driver had walked away without a scratch. I could hardly process what I was seeing, but an uneasy familiarity washed over me. This was exactly what I'd seen in my dream: the violent accident, the strange preservation of the driver, the feeling of spirits hovering nearby. It was all too precise, too real, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I stepped back, my heart pounding. I knew now that this wasn't just a coincidence. I had seen this before it happened, and somewhere deep inside, I knew it wasn't the last time I would sense something like this. The connection I had feared all my life was real, and it wasn't going to let me go. As the reality of what had happened sank in, a chilling thought surfaced. The dream, the strange feeling that morning, even the way my dog had stared at me, they all seemed connected to this accident. It was as if I had been shown the tragedy before it unfolded, like some kind of warning or message from beyond. A part of me resisted, not wanting to believe that my family's so-called gift had somehow chosen me. But I couldn't deny the unmistakable sequence of events. I'd spent my entire life trying to distance myself from anything supernatural, yet here it was, pushing its way into my reality. The signs were impossible to ignore. I had heard stories from my family about moments like this, how my uncle saw things others couldn't, and how my mother sometimes felt things before they happened. I'd always dismissed their tales as exaggerations, but now, standing here, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The worst part was the feeling of entrapment, that I could never truly escape this presence, that seemed to linger around me, waiting for a moment to reveal itself. I realized that, despite all my attempts to live a normal life, I was bound to this connection in a way I couldn't sever. I didn't want it, didn't want to sense these things or be drawn into their mysteries, but they were woven into my very existence, unrelenting, always lurking in the shadows of my mind. Walking away from the scene, I felt hollow and uneasy, as if I'd been marked by something beyond my control. I knew I'd carry this weight with me, the chilling awareness that there was a world just out of sight, one that seemed intent on reaching through and touching mine, whether I liked it or not.